So one of the things that we talked about in a previous class is resources.
Devi Duntra Devi Geta Sotan Kashina to share Chikaris Tambala and then Ananga to resource Lanata, Juchasuguro, Chesiki Juchati Corres.
So one of the things that we'll talk about today is where some resources are and how we can help each other to build resources.
Tiranga to trade the current system, but Tinado, which is Juchati call your message, and it Suela and Atsu corner and yet grace. Tina singing us with Tinado, which is Juchatinado, that Nyamton Chima Tambina, Canado Chitant Grace, Layata.
And one of those resources in the United States is Faculty for Undergraduate Neuroscience.
That and the dinner Chico Juchamanpuchi Dam Society and the Delaya once a century on the Tajaj do there is.
And I'm not getting good internet, so I can't share it with you, but I can share this with you.
That and the tragedy Shuyabumudus Trajani Sajat Sejit in the do young Mendu Simba and Naya, than the Trawati get Tratachi or what do you ditch it to Layapa tenant.
This resource is on our classroom Google class.
That and the thing to Google Classroom and Shasha is.
And there are two tabs in this document, here and here.
That and the Delaya Tandaki Shosh to us, Shokodela in Bana Kura like Nguini, the Nguiti Damsati, all at what they are, Yon Surgu Waterla, Yongo Water Tabaina, and Yidamedua.
This one, online resources, I started putting some websites and places where you can find information.
That and the Delaya, Jutratoke, and Eko Chesiki Chayosa, such a trios, that Tina Laya, Netatonico Shaja. And this
one we'll talk about later, but it has the SFN core concepts link, and then you all and us too will start filling in these that will tell us where to go when, say, we want something on the amygdala.
That and the declaration system, but data Nazugula Chigre and Chesugula Tenarochi, Stapicha Shapan and Dingasuga Tika once a Henry Soduku, Jewish Jane Chitrishayara, or Tigi Zunane, Tangomangasu, USA, call a Picha Shapina, and Gomangasu, that slide Jusha Jusuguru, Lutkana Jusha Jura, Tiginani, the Picha Shapana, come to Leshu, course secondary to do Sena, they come to Lesu, the Koala you may or what the Trisatians.
So for instance, on the resources that you have access to for years 1 to 6, you might put amygdala under the English, the Tibetan word, and then program would be training phase, and then year 6, whatever day it is, and then the slide number where it shows something about the amygdala.
That and the Bana Diga Candas Reversing in Chitilata, Amidala Corim Bana, Kamsila Shu Corim, Tamputela in Chikitri, Nitty Jetala, Poikitri, Nitty Jelaya, and Karsa, Nico Lishika races, Tabalaya, Tingasu John Degilish dress, training the race, Roa, and it look at Swimbalu to Panalu to Pache, and Nitty in Yamakasuresha, Yama Tamponio says, Goro at the Dam Jelaya, and Nico. The
idea here is that this will make it easier to find the resources you need. So for instance, if you're doing work on sleep and memory, you could search this for sleep and for memory and see where the resources are.
That day, I should do you in speech Shapana Chesudela, and yet Tampanic Parogan Javatico Korean Bana, and a Gantela and Yetio Water temperature, and it on JV Loctonian Richard or what on the Pine Bana, and each other Yanchep had Sagadus Tambala said, do your race.
So we'll talk more about this later when we work on building it out, but I wanted to at least introduce it to you now.
아하 단대 가수게 지금 싱글 합신데 드피 값은 가수데 같을래 양신데 시작에 인심반 단단데 우토 지지데데 아니 지금 가수게 철시가래 이면 우토 지데 인스
Today we're going to focus on neuroanatomy.
아하다 드랑 가수게 조시데 가수 왕사게 폰이 빠지고와 어디 코리안스
The neuroanatomy pieces that we'll focus on today are going to be large structures or big systems in the brain.
다 단다 드랑 가수게 왕사게 폰이 빠그나네 소데 카렌 시스템 발라야 다고 왕사게 말라나네 다고 찾고 다 지티 치비기를 들었다기엔스
And we'll start and talk about various different connections within the brain.
당 아소카싱의 시스템 발라야 레파그나라 요피게 터주거 나소파치고로 왔던 것도 제인스
This is building on number one, or the brain is the body's most complex organ, of our SFN core concepts.
단다 가서 왕서천의 그 초대 구축에 따주스고로 깨치어제치고로 뜨거나네 담보디 카레 시스템 발레파세테 칼라나 가서 주포는 게 안정선 사슈기 안정선 지슈기 아니 그 왕부들의 사시고로 왔디 시샤데 땅 때랑 때가 수무투치기스
Do you know what that is on the screen? So these slides are available in your Google Classroom, and you can follow along on there. Jillian is still eating her breakfast, so I'm going to use the English version because I can't read the Tibetan version. But if you need the Tibetan version, look at it on your phone or on your computer in Google Classroom.
나하다 단다 겐라기 게 로파게 다다 셀라초데 샤스 단다 아니 군즈나 디 트랙이 제트 인치기 tellatagi 인스로 아니 단다 되게 록토니엔디 인바이나 차마데나 구글 클래스룸나 샤샤요레로 아니 셰수고 tel라 스신즈진니 냠트 드로고사
And what we'll be doing is looking at the different areas of the brain.
나하다 단다가 다이테 카레인세나 아니 카사 레파게 그 차시만도요로 어떻게 돌아타게 예스
It fixed itself. Thanks. So first I want to remind you of the directions, and we talked a little bit about this before. So if it's toward the nose, that's going to be rostral.
다 당부지 지술이야 무토 채팅 카린 시스템가 수가 레팔라타기 값을 레파게 그 카쇼텐 던식으로와 카쇼텐 더 코리안스 다 디게 아나기 쇼던도 요파임바나 아니 든레스
And if it's toward the tail, it will be caudal.
다 nga마기 쇼임바임바나 잡레스
Now obviously we don't have a tail, and the rostral part is near our face, but the caudal part is going to be down toward our feet.
다 ngasul라 임바나 nga와요 마르와 다다디 값스 nga수게 든티타 nga수고 동파가 쇼체 아니 카스고레타 잡티 카레 시스템발라야 죽스고로다 잡티 아니 캄바가 쇼라요레스
And our ventral is going to be here, and our dorsal is going to be here.
다 땅땡아 수게 되게 졸라지 아니 어디 되게 졸라 마요레스.
When we're talking about coronal sections, that's like a crown that would go this way across the brain in slices.
다 주샤 사이즈도가 주샤 사이땡아 수게 다 두스 샤주레스와 델로는 두스는 버치드 샤주들레 주샤스 고레스.
In your Tibetan terms, this is called central, but I think that was a translation thing because this looked like it was in the center. It really is slices all the way through this direction.
다 단다디 보이나나 주세셔요레스 당아 주당 샹테 페지 주당 샹사이지가 탈라드네 고랑 탈라데데 샤시고로 데레샤 임바이나 이야칼라스 담발라 주마시 부마리스 드니 잡다 간잘라 샤샤요레스 고 쇼티 탕고 마토베.
And it goes from anterior, where our eyes are and our face is, to posterior, the back of our head.
단 드니 잡다 던쇼네 자쇼바다 두고레스 nga sugeta tia nayo sani je bejalo de bet tak jakto yo sabata dugore's
Look at the Tibetan on their phones. And remember, the sagittal sections are going to go this way. So slices in the brain this direction.
ta dikase der do shinsha de karla stambalaya sunindus dugore's.
And horizontal sections will go this way in the brain.
Mahanta de horizontal la da de la bana ngam shak sach da da shis taja ka ta bana ko dus dugore's.
Do you feel like you understand that?
Kuju do chi thor sa esa.
Show me sagittal.
Sagittal na shansharwa.
Okay, I saw some out there. Show me horizontal.
Horizontal la na dirwa ngam sha.
Show me anterior.
Anterior la na dun rwa.
Anterior is going to be in the front.
Dun.
Show me dorsal.
Jab.
Okay, now we're going to play a game with this.
Yeah. Yes.
Now we're going to play a game with this.
Tada nga simuch tigins.
The game is called Simon Says.
Sorry?
Simon Says. The game is called Simon Says.
Ta de res tsitil ka simuch yate Simon gid lab res eg simuch tigins.
If I say Simon Says, then you show me.
Ta gelagi simuch ka Simon gid lab res istambala ani tigi jela chichu tengu yores.
If I don't say Simon Says, and you show me, you're out.
Ta gelagi Simon gid lab res iti mala paina ti mala pachi yo chorong ka tem paina ta chorong ti shorgu yores. Simuch
So don't show me, even if you know, unless I say Simon Says.
Roa, ta gelagi dire distensho lago yore, distensho laba tigin danlo la ya samang dida lapsong se paina, jini tengures. Samang dida lapsong ti mala paina, tem paina chorong norgu yores, ni chorong shorgu yores.
And wait to show me for Dawa to translate so everybody gets a fair shot.
Mahanta tanda sama ki ya chete ya gela senu jela ya ngi jurgu gorwa.
Okay. Do you think you understand?
Kutsu so esa.
If you don't, raise your hand and I can help you out.
Mahanta tanda yang guma suna ya lapa ya ba charochis ani gela ki dus deshe jagosa.
All right, let's see how it goes. Simon says, show me sagittal. Wait for him.
Shinshak ten rochisa.
Okay, so I'm going to have you be honest. If you showed me sagittal, which is this way, you're still in. If you showed me this way or this way, you're out. And you can just sit and watch other people now.
Aha, that and the Chitsuki Shinshala, do Sibana Korwa, do Sinanor Sarwa. Remember, this Tampalaya, nor the Panata Susu, Lapama Shachi, Jenda, and the chicken to terror cheese.
Simon says, show me dorsal.
Jab terror cheese.
Remember to tell him Simon says too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Simon Jab terror cheese doos.
Simon says, show me frontal.
Simon didn't terror like doos.
Simon says, show me lateral.
Lateral, let's see.
It's not on there. Lateral is going to, oh, I'll do horizontal. Simon says, show me horizontal, sorry.
Simon, Ngamsha terror like doos. Ngamsha.
Yes, if you were doing this, you're correct.
This you find it curious.
Okay, show me anterior.
Jab terror cheese. This there.
All of you showing me, you're out. I didn't say Simon says.
Simon Galapson Lames, this Tambalachitu by another no Saris.
Simon says, show me horizontal.
Simon Ngamsha terror cheese like those.
Good. Simon says, show me anterior.
Anterior, this door. Simon could do terror like those. Yeah, for those terms, dorsal, anterior, posterior, everything is like a front, back, and top and the bottom in Tibetan. So that's easy.
Okay, good.
Translate. Yeah.
Except that anterior is going to be here, ventral will be here, dorsal's here, and posterior. So yeah, I guess would be the same. So it's easy. That's good.
Top and bottom and the front and the back. Yeah.
Simon says, wait, actually those are the same you said. So let me do a different one. Have we done any others? Okay. Simon says, show me coronal.
Yeah. Simon goes to shut down what you those.
Good. So this is something that if you want to do it, you can play it with each other, or you could bring it into a classroom, and it makes it a game, so people are engaged. The more you can engage your students in doing it, the more they'll want to do it, and the more they'll learn. If it's a game that they like, they'll do it outside of class, and that's exactly what you want, because you want them studying outside of class. Now this one's an American game, but I'm sure you have Tibetan games that you could adapt to using in the same way. When I was a student, one of the things they did was at mealtime, they would say, you can have this to eat, but you've got to answer this question first.
Sana degrees, the saya chite the churang de sana degrees, shigres, Ebanaya, churang de saya laya, Joan de la Lem Jagures, Hagisimuchioris.
And if I got it wrong, they'd take a little bit back.
The Katie Trotic Lenti, Norba and Bana, Tesha Jutin on the Tissi Ponduguris.
And they would ask me another question. And if I got that wrong, they would take a little bit more back.
That Yansi Troa Tilla Norba and Bayatin on a Yonoch Park into Yoris.
There was one time where somebody behind me was telling me the answers.
That Tomachila Yanga Jablon, Nigi Miti, Lenti, Desijabsons.
And I was listening to him,
ta ngi tele nyen de yes
and he was wrong.
ku let nor chas
And I didn't have much food that night.
this tambala ya ngala gonda tele khala sita rama sons
But it was still fun.
imba na true shoe jones
So remember, Jillian told you about white matter and gray matter.
ta kesan ge jilen la ge ta da ga su ge karji ta chaji ko mutu chi ores
The gray matter is going to be where there are lots of axons and that fatty myelin.
chaji ti kar les tambala ya de kar sa dalen sa ten ro dache sa ten dache ge sa ten ga la ya ani de kar sa shakhsi yo sa tires
And the gray matter is going to be where the cell bodies and the nucleus
you
is.
said gray matter and gray matter
Oh, shoot. So this should be
Sorry.
white matter, sorry. Myelinated axons. So where there are lots of axons and myelination and fat, it will be white.
ta tanda tele tampu tele chaji sa son chaji nor son sro tanda de ko ge dache sa ten ga la ya nga su ge pe su gi shim ba yo ra pe shin yo sa te ba na pe shin te ta ku chlu gu trba yin sa te la tene de ta ku karji yo res karji ti chwa yo res ne tanda thapung gu lu yo sa shi to ga te la ya ani chaji yo res
And where the cell bodies and the nuclei are will be gray matter.
ta tanda thapung gu lu yo sa ta ani thapung gu tining yo sa chi go ro sa che te la ya ani tanda de ge aso ge chaji ti yo res
Remember, we've got large parts of the central nervous system, and those include this area, the wrinkled area, the cerebrum, or the neocortex.
da da de la yang asu kari ore sena ta ti won sa mala ke ku tripche chashi sugro nga su ga lesson chi lesson na ne ta da neocortex system bala ya ta neosena sawachi cortex lesson wa lesson ti gi chashi ta tu ore standard modina ne
Then we've got inner structures, which will be the midbrain and hindbrain structures.
da ya lep ta da ge lesson ti ta thala yo batir do ta nalo la yo batil la ya nga su ga perle gi chashi chi perle gi chashi te la perle gi chashi ta ne jable se chi ro wa o de gi chashi ta tu ore
So these are the areas we're going to be talking about today: the cerebrum, the midbrain, and the hindbrain.
da tirang asu chete tanda ge cerebral yorwa tanda ga su ge alechin chi gorwa te tan tane kasa perlech gorwa te tan jable ti korte ga su terang oto yes
If I do a sagittal section, which of these are you going to see?
da ke te ro ga su ge sagittal senan dirwa chisha che ba imbaina ane lepa ge chashi kange thongres
Here's my hint to you. This is a sagittal section.
Shinsha son gonda shinsha che ba imbana kari thongres
You're going to see all of them in a sagittal section. The only exception to that is if the sagittal section is here, you won't see the midbrain because it's in the middle, and you won't see the hindbrain because it's in the middle. You'll just see this part of the cerebrum because the cerebrum's all around the brain.
da tanda dirwa nga su ya de da dirwa shinsha de che ba imbana tanda de thongres imbana nga su shinsha che de shinsha ke ko ge lepa ge thatini che ba imbana nga su perla tan tu thong mares ka chila ba thagti ma se thwayo marwa
If I do a horizontal section up here, what will you see?
da ke te nga su ge ngamsha chi gorwa ngamsha de lepa ge tang to ne ngamsha chi ba na chashi kari thongresa
Cerebrum. Yep, that's it.
lechente thongres
If I do a horizontal section at my nose, what will you see?
da na ge samni ro ngamsha de chi ba na kari thongresa
So we're going to see hindbrain and cerebellum.
tanda de nga su ge
And you can't see it on this picture, but you'll see cerebrum here and back here, right at the nose.
aha tanda nga su ge la chen che ani tanda kar su gre de nag samne to ba ina ro ani ka sa perle tant su thong yores.
So we have two hemispheres, a right and a left.
aha tanda nga su la ya kar sa dumche le pa la ya dumche ni yores yi tang yon yores.
And our brain does some slightly different things from the right side and the left side.
aha tanga su le pa ge yi tang yon ge chi likha chi tang chi ro tis man ro yores.
So, for instance, there are some speech centers here on the left side.
aha ta yon shu sala ta ba ba na yon shu sala ya nga su ke da ri chi ya ge ko ge tin ti yores.
We've got hearing on the left and the right side.
aha ta nga su the su tang de we ge le pa cha shi ta yi tang yon ni sha ga na yores.
We've got seeing on the left and the right side.
aha ta thong su tang de we ge le shin ti ya yi tang yon ni sha ga na yores.
But note that what this part of the brain perceives is what this eye sees here and what this eye sees here.
aha ta nga su ge de le ta ba ba na le pa yon be ga ne nga su ge ti chi go ro kar sa. Hello, lepa yombe ge thongso le singna ne ko ge chatrin yuwa chorwa chatrin de kandasre se stambala ya nga chu mi ge ni cha ge na ne ta chi thonang ge yi shu sala yo patro da ngombu teng do wa ro o de thong go yores ni cha ge na ne de ge chatrin de thong go yores.
And what this side of the brain sees is what this eye sees here and what this eye sees here.
aha ta yi shu ke ro le pa yi shu ti bai bai na mi ke ro mi ke tada ke lepa ke dumshe yiwa sho la yo pi ge dige ani mi ge yiwa ge ani ku ge migla ma yen ta yen ba ge migla yen ba ni cha ge ni ste tung go res.
And note that everything that happens on this side of the body is interpreted on this side of the brain.
aha ta de gane kari chi go res system when you say this side which side sorry.
So left side body, right side brain.
thong de thosa da ta de thosa ode tanda temba tirwa de sa la ya zupu ge chashi de la chong ba de ane le pa ge chashi jen de to la ya ku tang chi ge res.
Do we have a different laser pointer? Something I could point with so it won't beep? And there is an area in between the two hemispheres called the corpus callosum.
aha da shenda ga su ge de kar sa quran che ge lepa dum she yi ta yon ni cha ro dum she yi ta yon ni cha ge paro la ya sa cha chi go res de la ya de ta phe che le sam yin sa so le sam sa ge res.
That lets the right side and the left side talk to each other. That's how they communicate.
aha da te la ten de ta ga su ge lepa ge yi ta yon ni ge paro la ya da pha se tong la jit ge res.
So if I were poked in the eye by somebody and I no longer had my right eye, what part of the brain would interpret what I see?
ah ta ke te mi chi ge ngi mi yuwa na tele dus kar sa mi yuwa na tele chon che bai bai na mi yuwa la chon chi thong cha bai bai na ngar ga le pa cha shi kari chi ke ngar ga ta chi thong sur ti ane yi se chi ge yores.
If you said both sides, you're correct.
aha ni ga se na dik sa res.
Because remember, this left eye sends this information here and this information here.
aha ro ta na ga su ta mu yuwa ba la ta bai bai na mu yuwa ba ti ge mu ge yuwa ba ti la ten de te ko ge cha chen te le pa cha shen sha la tang ga do wa.
If I were to cut this nerve here, which side of the brain would tell me what I see.
Keti tanda gelagi tensar wa to ne ku ga wangsa ti tu stuba imbaina ani lepa gi chashi goala ya thoma ti ischi yores. Right. Right.
So this side is going to be all that I can get information from, because if I cut this nerve, this is sending the blue down here. If I cut that, I don't have that information. So all I'm getting is red from this side and red from this side.
Ta tanda tila sajeto ane tanda ke ngombu yo se ke ti tu pa imbaina ane mi ki thongla na yo pi ta chondo ngombu yo pi ki cha chin ti ko la pana roy ko yo mara re mare ti stambala ya thoya te marpu ti mas thong yo mares.
So if I have damage in the brain and I know that one of the nerves has been cut, I can just ask the person what do they see, and I know where the cut is.
Ta keti ro lepa la chon chi de ta lepa la chon sho bala tene chi thoma la ya ka su ta man ko ga chon sho ba imbaina ane mi te la ke che de ta chon ga kari thong du se chi ke che wala tene de te ane ta lepa ge tanda ga ta sa ka gi la chon sho ba de ha kut kres.
Doctors use this principle when they are doing a physical exam on somebody. They will ask them to move different body parts. They will poke them and say, can you feel this? Because if there's damage somewhere in the brain, you can get an idea of where that damage is just by their body.
Ta amji zu ge nebala ya ta taksi chi be kaps ani tablen de da wala tende de ta ha ku yo res picha sha pa bana lupu ge chashi manda ngo cho ta sa da ta lupu ka tele ani chi man sa manda sala nen de ta chi chorgu dwe se a chi wa de ta la tende de ta ani ku ge le pala ya chon sho yo me te ku tot ku yo res ta ke ti dinan wala chi de te ani ku ka chorgu mundu ta chag mundu se pa bana le pa chashi ta ropes ko ala ya chon sho go patia amji tot kres.
So if I'm a doctor and I ask a patient, can you hear anything in your left ear? And they say no, what can you tell me?
Ta keti isra amji chi ba che ane ku ge ne pa chi la ya chorong ga nan jo yomba gi ku ge dwe sena ane tanda nam jo yomba ku ge dwe la na ne pa ti ge nam jo yomba ge chi ku gu mandu sa ba na ta amji ti ge kari ha kut kres. Lepa yo la chon sho wa.
What they say?
Defect in the right hemisphere.
So this is a great example of what Jillian was saying yesterday. When you have a hammer, everything is a nail. When you have a neuroscientist, everything has to do with the brain.
Ta kesa ge jilin so wa na se res ke te choran la thua chi yo pa na chang man jarmala nang re sa chi ko wa ti na sing ge ne wansa chai ru pa chi ba na ka nge cha ma te le pa ta na nga su ga wansa mala tan re yo chu la ya chi di sa ge res.
Maybe that patient has too much earwax in their ear, and that's why they can't hear you.
Chi che ba na ne pa ti ga na ga na la nga su ga ta na sa sig ro na na chi duwa chi duwa ti mampu sida yo pa che mantra che ne ma ko te na do is baris.
Or maybe their eardrum is broken, and so it can't conduct the sound, and that's why they can't hear you.
Chi che ba na te ge na ga nga sig ro na jo na yo pi ta da to sa ga nga ti thulan ro bala te ne ta da ma ko te ne is baris.
Or maybe the bones in the ear are broken, and so they can't hear you for that reason.
Chi che ba na na yo pi ge ta nga su ko chin chin ka shi go ro ti su thula chen bala te ne ta ma ko te ne is baris.
You get the idea. So don't just assume it's something to do with the brain because you know that the brain does that. Think about all of the things that might affect that.
Da che su ge lepa ge sheli tin ro chi chi yo pa te ha ko te ta cha ma lepa tan ro yo kre se yo ma re ti yo la ya ko jisen ti ko na su pa chi go re sti stan bala ya jisen na su pa ti gan la samji ta ke chen res.
And you're right, it might be that part of the brain, but it might be something else too.
Chorong ge tanda ge lepi ki chashi te la chon sho yo res yon se pare se ma te lan ki yo res ti na shin ge ya chi chi pa na ya jise jenda la te ne ins pares.
This corpus callosum that's sending information from the right to the left, is that going to be gray matter or white matter?
ta tanda nga su lepa ni ga paro ge da pha sa ta ni chi go lepa ni ga sena lepa ge dumche ni ga paro la ya da ta ni ga lesam chi go wa lesam ti cha zero we kar zero is kar zero white matter.
Good. Yes, that'll be white matter. Nope. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this one out. I'm going to use mine that works, and I'll just use this for laser pointer. Perfect. This is the corpus callosum. It's going to be in between the two hemispheres, and you can see it right here in this sagittal section of the brain.
Ta tanda di ka resena dina yopi ge muna ten shabati dirwa nga su ge lesam tirdo lesam ti tanda de la ya nga su ge lepati ma shinsha che barwa shinsha che bate ge nani dus thoya diris.
There are patients who have lost their corpus callosum, and we can learn about what the sides tell each other in those patients because they don't have the connection.
Ta ya tanda ge lesam ti thola du ni ge ne patina do yores ta tina do taksi che bala tene dete ne lesam ju dete kusu ga nis kari chi pha sa tang yo me ti tot ki yores.
There are lots of white matter connections in the brain.
Ta lepa ga na la ya nga su ke karzi ge thujur ti ha cha mang bo yores.
This is a picture of all of those white matter connections. You can see it makes up pretty much the whole brain.
Ta karzi ge thujur ti pe ti kasu yo pande teng yores ta da der mula ta ba im baina karzi ge thujur ti nga su ga lepa kansan ro khang duas.
At first glance, just looking at this wrinkled part looks pretty similar. How might we look at the structure of this and segregate it into parts?
Da tanda nga su ge da de trishik twa chi yin se su tri de chia res tang po te nga su ga lesson de du sta ba yin ba na cha ma chi ge dong do su ra chi ngwe thum bo do chi la thong ga dus yin ba na ya tanda ga ta lesson sarma se kro ta de neo cortex lesson sarma de la ya ani ko chi da nga su tum bu la ya la ya cha shi su su la ya la ya nga su che chu ka ri chi shi sha gu ro es. Chechu kangi chila shisha de ta ne ko ta de lesson tirwa lesson ti ani tambai gugres.
Take a moment and talk at your table about it and see if you can come up with an answer as a table.
Ne susu ge dinsen susu na tele trida chiro ches. Trida che de te ani de la lunch ra ga de chitaro chitas.
Fly. Get away from my stuff. No, I'm fine.
Do you want to switch over and then I can do the English so that they can see me better while they're talking?
Oh no, they've got them on their phones and things.
Because I'm just doing the recording.
Oh yes, for the recording, absolutely. Yes, let's switch. Can you put yours, do you have this, right? It's on the Google Classroom,
okay.
if you don't.
My insurance is not letting me onto the hall today.
Oh yeah, neither was mine. I was going to show them a website and I couldn't show them.
I'm on this other one. And
So I'd rather stay in English until you get it set up. But once you get it set up, I'll switch to Tibetan. Yep. Did you have any luck or no?
I'm just trying to get
All right, I'm going to bring people back.
Sure. Well, last that is Hosa.
Okay, let's hear from table 4. What did you come up with?
Roka Shiba. Chisu Kaltri de Johnson sa.
nga tsu rikaka ni tu jong ate nga tsu shangshi wa Then Talasa Jiwa. Or teaching any lapping and Chaki Karekare Mate. That is Shanshak. Shansochi, and Chisochi, and a Namshak, Namsonderwa, and a Chisonderwa. Or the end the teaching any Kares Chaki to go.
They will do a sagittal section picture and see what are the differences, different part.
And what will you use with the sagittal sections to tell the different parts? What will they use? What marker will they use to tell the different parts of the cerebrum? Sagittal sections. So here's a sagittal section. What will you use to tell the different parts?
Matsu Deo, and Zambachila Matsukarana, Lapa Chashitila, Damajo, Lapicoram, Damajiga, Nika, Chaki in
Lepantu sabena sama chatsona ore do ashipare do popade damajite yo kanda sigin sigur sela chechu karila tene de sigur wada ko chashide
Table 5, see if you can help them.
yeah yokonga
So, Dama Jera, Dama said it's so the Shilijo Kuzuki. Chiton could the Nisado, Chili Nigas, Chi short Nija, the town up down, then the Ko Lepa show down, the Nishili Nila Jani, Chivaris.
What they're saying is we can differentiate the part of the cortex using on their functions. So that's what they're saying.
Okay, if we're going to use separating them by their function, how do we know which part for a function?
Kitchen Mando Chine. Kitchen Mando Jini, Gani Gichot Hepkere, the Kitchen Yora. Kitchen Mando Pipchuton, the Lapakung Salon Chicken doing Yanshi.
We have two different answers.
Okay,
From
go
here
ahead.
he says like we can have patient with a different part of the brain damaged and see which function is doing. And also the other answer is we can send a different stimulus.
Okay.
And see which part is doing.
Those are both good. So we could scan this brain with like a functional magnetic resonance imagery and see which areas are active when they're seeing things. That could work.
Tanga sugo lepa per jabala tende terwa tanda sheba nasire lepa per jab kapsa ta cheli kari chi tripikas lepa ge chashikange chi salon chi du search korwa o tusti de tayang ko lepi chashikange chi cheli kange tande yo mete tayo res.
Or we could take somebody who doesn't have their occipital lobe, and if they don't see things, then we know that's what the occipital lobe is for.
Ta shende baranga sugo tagde bla thula roji gi nepa chi ki khurang ge ane khola takshe chi de te ne cheli kari la shon du te ta be de te nga sugo tagde ti gi cheli kari ba ya shit ko res.
Let's say I have this brain, it's no longer in a person. How can I discriminate between areas of the brain just on the structure of this brain that I see?
Tarwa that and the thing as you delay, but me kill me caping on a yomar, watch Loton Shire, or that digi Zusta dilate de Bambada and the lepage hashiti and say you are cheating series. Lashing session. A cande
Call them.
정답. 인게 선다게. Spinal cord.
If we know the backside, then that is the frontal lobe. We can decide that. Based on that, then this one is the occipital lobe. Then we can say the lower one is
That's
temporal.
parietal. Yep.
Parietal lobe.
And then occipital.
Yeah.
And
The
temporal
lower.
and frontal. But how do we tell where the frontal starts or the frontal ends and the temporal starts?
Tanda dirwa tanda de ko gila sombati ta ti ji thui twa ka system ba nga sugun dinde ta chigdap chigarwa ni chamti kana sa kures dinde ti ju zoba ta da chinde gu zuga ge chap chigarwa nga sa kures
tanda di
tanda cham
lesion no la tanda lesion no la tabzi do
ya inke sonda ge sana
I think we can differentiate different lobes of brain based on the depth in the folding.
Yeah, so we can use these folds, these sulci, to tell where one part ends and the other part begins. Yeah.
Tagares tananga so tepso jesa ga subka yorwa da ro tepso jesa ga nyarma ga subka yorwa subka tanda digi ko ga tang sablo la tene de terwa nestambala dila tene de tanga sugita lepa gita damar wa dama chikem gunzu sa da dama chikem juk disate nga sugi chepa it res.
The neocortex has lots of areas, and they differ not just in terms of back and front, but also within each wrinkle, you've got different layers of cells.
Da danda nga sugi lesion sarma sigro da lesion digi ga la ya ane ko la yan dinta jabla sopa ga chashi mampu yo pa ga mase ne danda ge ko tepso thesa ga na la ya ane wansa thazu ke yon ko aramba ma suna ya mampu yo res.
So the layers of cells are like these pieces of paper. I've got this layer here of cells, and it's communicating with this layer, which is communicating with this layer below it, which is communicating with this layer below it, which is communicating with this layer below it. You get the idea.
Ta danda shogo tirwa ko thapung ga ramba sigdo thapung ga ramba te tena ro yo pa che tigi ola ya shenda che tigi ola tigi shenda tigi ola shenda che ane ko che ramba je to ko che da tolen te chigi yo re system bala ya le pi gi tanga su step so the gi chu ro le ba o tigi na la ya ko thapung te ramba ma bo yo res.
If the layers were flat in our head, our head would be as big as a newspaper.
Ta ketirwa danda ge thapung ge ko ge ramba kha yo ra ramba kha te te chong ma ta ba chi leble lepchang im bai na ane nga su ga lepa gi chi chong te ane chapan da u chambu yo res.
You know that's not going to work because we have our brain inside our skull, and unlike a city, we can't just grow it out more.
That this tambala ya nga su ge ti tinanu jong masabate nga su ha ku res kashila pa mana nga su ga lepa te ta kape ge na go ku na yor wa this tambala ku kasa ko thod ji o maris.
So we keep the layers together.
Imbe na nga su kar chi res tambala ya ku ga ramba ma po yo pate nyam te ne wa chi gi res.
And put them into a smaller space.
Ta mabu yo ba de ro ko nyam te ne ba ka shilai ku zur de te ku sa kun chun chun chi kana tele ni thaba chi yo res.
The layers are still talking to each other, but now they're in wrinkles in the shape of the brain.
Ta ko ge ramba paro la ta ndo ba na da ton le chi yo res im ba na ya nyar ma gu sut ro te chok the de yo res.
That's why if you see a brain area that has wrinkles, it lets you know that there's something very important that had to happen there in a very small space.
다 레퍼가나 텝서 단예르디 통바인바나 코게 사쿠 때라야 아니 사쿠 하정거 총총 때라야 아니 코 니스케 첨부지 중고요 바티 당기요레스.
So if you're looking at an animal and they have a brain region that is wrinkled, that lets you know something that brain region does is very important to that animal.
다 케티처럼 그 샘친지라 와 샘친지게 레파라 통 레파게 사치줄라야고 녀마 텝석도 시첨부터요 바인바나 저런 가르하고 그래서 스탄발라야 단다게 샘친게 레파게 텝석테사게 자시티 네샤오 게첨부지 드바탄저요 바티처럼 가고 그래서
And or whatever that is doing for the animal requires a lot of computing power.
다티게 가서 그래다 디 샘친티게 레파게 자시텔라야 가리치 듣고요 바텔라야 안에 가서 지가서 그래다 지지가 이기다 뉴버 펀첨부스 그래서
Look at this part. Is this wrinkled?
데라야 녀만도에서
Wrinkle, 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 wrinkle.
녀만도에서
Lots of wrinkles. We're not seeing with this. We know vision is important. So what is this part of the brain doing?
달레파 자시티게 가리치고 그래서
Something important. We'll get to it later.
게첨부지 듣고요 그래서 다 제일한데서 자기스
So our brain has left and right hemispheres.
당가서 레팔라야고 듬셰이 당요요로와
And the cerebral cortex is connected by the corpus callosum to connect these two right and left hemispheres so they can talk to each other.
레첸게 레파게 가수게 듬셰니가 데로와 데게다 듬셰니라요 베게 레첸게 레슌요로와 데데 가수 레섬게 네 데트지 데타 펜슬라다 데 동라지기 지고요레스
The cerebral cortex is this outer covering of the two hemispheres of the brain.
디 단다가 수가 레칭게 레션사 주라 레첼레션 티카레스 스tam블에 듬체니기 줄로라 욕비기 자시드레스
So that gray matter is on the outside, and then they're sending in all their axons, and that's the white matter.
다코 자지티 줄로라 욕바지 아니 코게 다가 수가 다치 사트요라 다치 사트인데 낭로라 요레스 스tam블라야 아니 낭로라야 거지티 요레스
I don't know how this translates, but cortex is the Greek word for bark, because just like a tree, this cortex is on the outer side of the brain.
단다 cortex 사주라 가수가 레션 세기 cortex 세기 인식 츠데니 Greek 츠데 단다 슌파 사주라 신동게 신기발 신가 빠빠요라 슌파 세 츠도안이 정주레스
The cortex has 20 to 30 billion neurons.
단다 레션 나나야 아니 원서 타주 템퍼니션이 숨지요레스
And over 100 trillion connections.
다 데이터가 바로라야 그 tukach고런 데이터티 아니 툭툭 전부 잘마요레스
This is more than we can even imagine.
데이터 가수가 지금 삼삼리 디와 삼일리 디와 된다 지레스
This is one of the many reasons that the brain is the most complex organ in our body.
다 데라테네 데데 아니 레파데 가수 수분하는 용자 제슈게 왕부치 차고요레스
Unless you think about our skin and the many billions of bacteria on it,
야 초전데 telechitsunga chu pakpatanga pakpakangla ya nega sugi ji sembudi da thampa mabuyorwa o tilai sanlo tang pai pai na yang kuneta logare mato
and then maybe skin is the most complex.
tinero sanlo tang pai mai chichinanga suga pakpate yang konyong do chashite insibares
When you have a hammer, everything is a nail.
ta geti charala ya here's a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
옹부 투가 망불라기도 투가는 간대질라고 그래. 고아 간대질린 걸라다.
You have over here you said more than 100 trillion connections. What does that mean? Connections.
Connections means if I'm one neuron and he's another, we connect. So it's me sending a signal to him. Yeah. So over 100 trillion connections between one neuron to another.
Tata tukas detu se tikala na kiti ngara once it has a chin budget, Gela once it has a chin banner, call the Labatan, so I take a land that they lay to cigarette to Casicores, that take a lana once it has a chico, once it has a gentle layer, that it and go, or tender to Cachilacures.
This is one of the many reasons that a city being like a brain doesn't work. Because in a city, we don't have 20 to 23 billion people that are making over 100 trillion connections, even in the biggest cities.
That is Tambalarwa, Tanda Chanka de Latine de Tenga Suga Lepagi, Pitsunsions, Tambaleka, Lepat and Pitsunsions, Tambala, Lepat, and Tronchica Zuxco by Bana, Kotanta, Yapuma, Batin de Latines. The Lepagan Layanga, so once it has in Bana, Koti or Tambanishin is red to Timbana, Tatuchambu Jalas Chigi or that Tronche Kasumgo Kasuchambu and me, the Tambanishin is Omarwa, and it announcing dead to Chia Tibet, Tatuchambu and Mabuche Omarwa, this Tambalaya, Masuga Lepati, the Tronche Kascopa in Banet, Tatatic emergency terrace.
Yes.
ngal trust ro tanta gingi tani tu sun samalangal lepa de la karje da karje ni yawa che so ta karje ma de karje thong ur sana exon de kan ya shaksi ki chuli chi ur de ki kembe karje de thong ur so so par de risha che wane kima de la karje pe shu shim re do de la du zama da de na lo le ya anu won sa tha su kun thun sa den ji ma bu chi wa na karje chi bu thong de kan de nas de kima de
Tunse Mambo Yobalatene.
Oh, Dinalada, Onza Tunse, Onza Mambo Yogu Warwa. Only Dil Garzi Chubu de Chadi at the Harinas.
Go ahead.
My question is about the appearance of the white matter in the center of the hemispheres. You have mentioned that white appearance is because of the myelin sheath on the axons. Yeah. If there are that many of connections, why we still see the white appearance in the central part of the brain?
So those axons that are making the connections, that's the greater than 100 trillion connections. So those axons are what make the connections. So if this is my axon and I reach out to this neuron, all of this is white matter. Well, yes, yeah. So here's my axon sending it, and here's his dendrite connecting. Yep.
But he could be connected to so many other people at the same time too. So that's what multiplies it.
Oh, he's asking why is this so much higher than this? Ah, okay.
No, not higher. Why? If the
I think his question was about white.
Yeah, white.
But I'll answer your question too. So her question was, why is this number so much higher than this number? And the answer to that is that if I send my axon, I need you now too, I can reach out to both of them on their dendrites. And so now I've got one axon but two connections.
Once it has a new by banner, Teletebig to catch go, Detty Mayo Pages system, Balaya, Suga, Duchess at Chiki, and the letter Tumalaya could do a chichi that it creates a terror. And a carpu in Bate, the Shijas on Koga, the Duchess at the Mount Kimalaya, or Duchess at Mambuko to Kajago, so Teletene Capuchares, the Shitijas.
But I should have checked before I just answered Jillian's question. Did I answer your question?
Drissa. Landed Drissa.
Oh, your question, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. This part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is responsible for some of the most complex aspects of how we perceive what's out in the world, you listening to me, you hearing me, you feeling the chair that you're sitting on. Go ahead for that, and then I'll let you.
Tanda diga suge lechengirwa leshung chashite ngasuge that the shetan samyon and guchu samshitan and asu koala yumela supayorwa or dig in your cheliti tatandra yores.
How you're feeling about this lecture, whether you're excited or bored or happy or sad or frustrated.
Asu Chorachor, Hanset and the way social karishindu to not do the Yana Nyopka. Yana Chiga Kasuka Jani to Rochida, Yana control Rochilangu, Teta Kasorachigorwa, or Teta and Yores.
It's responsible for your movement,
aha de ya charang guchu ta ya do yores
and it's responsible for your thought.
aha de mse susu ga samji chi goro ate ta do yores
It's very important.
this tambal ha che ke chembures
So it's wrinkled.
aha de la ten de ta ne ko la ya nyerma ma bu yores
This part is most of what we think about on a daily basis.
aha ta da ga su ga nam jin chi samlu ta we kap se samlu ta we ka tan ro yo ba de chashin de res
This part allows this organ to think about and study itself.
aha ta chashi de la ten de ta ane lepati ko de la samlu ta lepati ko la taksi chi ko res chashin de ge
And so for all of the dermatologists and biologists that might say the skin is more complicated than the brain, I would say to them, the skin is not contemplating itself.
aha ta ya de ga su ge chi papa ge chili khipa me ba chi goro papa chili khipa te ta ani chingi saru ba de su ge papa te ta ka sa ta ga su ge wa po nyota sa shi tere se ge ba na ngi ku se len ka re ja ge in se ba na papa khron ko la samle tant khyo mar la ba ya yes
It's not just the raw numbers and how many bacteria it might hold, it's also what can it do.
aha ta ko la ya ko ge chi khatan ta ko ga la ya simbu ma la ye chi pula ra le ge yo mares ko ge kari chit ko yo metela ra le ge res
That is not to say that I don't value what the skin does for me, because it does lots of things for me.
aha da tile tene de te ya nge chi papa ge kari chi ge yo metela na me tina do chi ta ba mares papa ge nga su chi te yang ko ge chele yang ko na ma chi du ko yo res
It's just not as complicated as the brain, or not as complex as the brain.
aha ane le pa na jin yong zo yo mares
So, you already know some of this, but let's review. How is function organized in the brain?
aha da de ne ta de ko che su ge chen chen ge yo res ta ga su ge ship chi chi ge yes ane le pa ga na la ya ane ku ge chele yo ra chele te ta kandas pant ge yo res kandas kont ge yo res
We've got symmetry between the right and the left, but then we also have functions that are all over the brain.
aha ta ya ga su ge le pa ge yi to yo la ta ba na yang khora nam chung ga ra jin chung cha yang yo res tem se yang shen da khorang ga chele yang su ka sa ko la yo chu tin da yang yo res mando yo pa te yang yo res
We've got things that are very much in a certain area of the brain, localized,
aha ta ta ga su la ba na kha chi ba na chele kha chi ba na le pa ge cha shi chi ngi chen chi la yo pa tin da yo res
and then we have other functions that are very distributed in the
aha
brain.
chele jenda ba na ya le pa ge cha shi ma pu la tram de pa tin da yo res
So let's talk a little bit about the areas that you already talked a little bit about when I asked the question in the cerebrum.
aha ta ta ga su ge le chen yo ro le chen na ne ane cha shi kha chin de shi ja ge s te ko la ya tang po che su ngone la tu de tis china sos
You have the frontal lobe,
aha ta dun de yo res
you have the frontal lobe here, and the frontal lobe is your thinking part of the brain. This is when I say something, what you're thinking about.
aha ta de dun de te ga su ge ta samji tang de wa te res ta ge ka sa che su kari sam go yo me de ke che che bi ka su samji ta chi go wa te tang de wa res
When we say something, you can hear Dawa and I because of your temporal lobe.
aha ta ta da dawa tang ara ni ke che de siam stampa che su kut ko yo res ta kut ba de ka res stampa la chang ge na to de ma chi go wa o te la te ne de chung go res
I can see you because of my occipital lobe.
ngarang ge che su thont ko yo res ti ka la stampa la ya tang da la te ne res
He can feel that because of the parietal lobe.
aha ta ta da du she ba de korang go chort ko yo res ti ka la te ne res stampa la ya chung da la te ne res
Slapstick works great on monks. All right. So our cerebral lobes have visual information, body sense information, temporal has hearing information, and frontal allows us to plan, judge, reason, remember.
Ahanta dada dusta baina ngasula lepagin tema yorwa dama di tanane tambutela ya ane di karsa tangdala tambaina ngasu thongsur tangdewa redwa chungde baina ngasu lubug lsur tangredwa ane karsa dige anatakan da baina thusur redwa ne ola yan dunde baina ngasu charshi tanga tangdewa yores.
I'm going to be talking about these two strips of the brain right here in just a little bit, and I want to point them out to you now. This is in the frontal lobe. This is where the brain controls our movement, like if I raise my hand.
Ahanta dada dela ya dundab gnangla yopi ko ge chita nyarma chidwa tambuch to dig korte desija ge insta di karitan de yoresena asugam guchu tan de yores tangi laba ya dus chapa banna di tan de yores.
And this is the strip that would be feeling what's on the tips of my fingers or on my hand.
Ahanta tanda dela tenju ge sarpu ge yang ko tambuch hashi chidwa di kare sena asug chorwa chiora wansor tan de tanda zumbu ge chela kare chi chorgu du sa ti tan de yores.
They are right next to each other, so whatever part of the body is able to move here, it's the same part of the body here that we are feeling. And they can talk to each other, they can communicate.
Ahanta ko yeta ngasuga dama ko chashi mandola dwa himba na korani ga phansala ya dewa chi ge yores ta kange chi ge dewa chi ba de ko ta chashi takta takta yores bisha sha pa na ngasu lapa kare ching ko che ta pa ban ko che ta wa tal ten de ti ge kare chi chorgu du sa chi korwa ten sha ne ko phajola takta takta yores.
It makes sense that where we hear might be the same brain area responsible for language, which we talk to each other and we hear, same brain area.
Ahanta danda ngasu ge chi ge thusur tan de wi ge le pi ge chashi ti ane ngasu ge ta ke che sha ge ke yi ta chi korwa ke ta ta ya de yores.
Notice that memory is partly here and partly here.
Ahanta tanda temba chi korwa temba ti ane ko ngasu ge ti tang ka sana tong de ma tan dun den ji na na yo patet tagudus.
Now, some of you said last time memory is in the hippocampus. So what's going on here?
Ta kashi imbaina kashi ge temba te ngasu ge chuta magna na yo res ge dus ta kari chi go res ta dela. Storage? It's saying storage.
So some memory storage for sure, yes. So there are different aspects of memory and different parts of the brain will do different parts of that memory. And yes, storage is going to be very important.
Res kashi nyarso se dus tanga su temba imbana temba khura la ya chashi ma bu yo ra re mare tis tamba la lepa gi chashi mando ge temba ge ang ku ge jeli ta chashi mando te la lekha chi yo re tis tamba la ya nyarso se ti temba ge na ne ku ke chambu cha yo res.
Good. We learn about these parts of the brain, as somebody suggested earlier, by folks who have damage to parts of their brain.
Ta ga su ge lepa gi chashi de ta kanda sa ku re system bala nge la gench ke so sa lepa gi chashi de to thula chimbi ge me la ya ni chung kanda ru chi chong du te la te de lepa gi chashi ge ne ku chili ti ha ku yo res.
This is a picture of Phineas Gage. He was working on the railroad. He was taking this metal rod and tamping down gunpowder, and it blew up, and the rod went through his head.
Ta tanda de tamputi Phineas Gage se tres ta kura imbana minkhur ga chaklam kala lekha chi be kapsa ne ko ga chi chakdon chi dong go sarwa imbana dela ya ane nga su ga miji ora mi berg berji te ki wala te de chakte yu de ta ko ga gu ta ka go ga po ka za ju chi du si kompri ores
Like this, through his head.
Go ju chi tanda ga ta touch ten so tu sta gulai kompu bares.
This is the size of that metal rod that went through his head.
다 그 라바존에 대 그게 레pun고 주지 레바 주지 누에게 찌찌고 찌동찌고 되게 지체 되는 오지레스.
Miraculously, he lived, but he lost his left eye and a large part of his left frontal lobe.
다 그런 다 순위지 티어레스 되게 칠라 임바이나 그게 아니 미기 연바데다 아니 든답지거로 안 든다 연마되게 자시 망치시 줄라치 말레스.
The frontal lobe does different things in different areas.
다 내가 순 든답지거로 안 든답되게 든답이야 전부여로 그 자시 만들기 제일 만들어 듣고요레스.
This part, as I told you before, is for movement. That was not hit by the rod, so Phineas Gage could still move after the accident.
다 단다 되게 자시 때문에 당근 고쳐 단도요 릴라인 바스. 다 Phineas Gage 단다 미텔 좀 바나 자신데 톨란도요 마레스. 디스탄발에 군 고쳐 단도요레스.
So if he lost his left eye and he can no longer see, is that the occipital lobe?
The 게티로와 게티 안에 그게 게티 그게 뭐가 연바치고로 뭐가 연바때 톨라도 바이나스와 뭐가 연바때 톨라도 바이나 아니 그 통고요 말와 디스탄발라야 틸라트니 그런 게 어디 가서 당답때 톨라도 와르웨스. No.
No, that's the eye, yeah. So remember, even though you have a hammer, not everything's a nail.
다 탱고레 가리 탱고레 세나 도와주어 바나 통세 상만디 말이스. 젊마 말이스.
HM is another person who had brain damage. So they destroyed part of the brain.
다 HM 세 대야 셴다 그게 레파가 차시라야 가사 쫀쇼르뉴게 네파치레스.
Some of the temporal lobes, including the hippocampus and the amygdala.
다 가수 디갑스 고카라라 요레스나 초타마타 감슬라 슐라 소베기에 아니 나탕다 마틸라 툴라션 요레스.
It wasn't all of the amygdala, so he could still feel fear, but it was all of the hippocampus, and he couldn't remember things short term.
다 amygdala 요로 다 가수 감슬라 슈게 차시 간자 툴라치요 마레 담발로 고게 셰나 땅안타데 소르트 요레스와 아니 셴다데 그런 게 가사 초타마티로와 초타마티 툴라치 마레 초타마티 툴라치 담발로 고게 다 템바제 두요레스.
So function has localized pieces and then also distributed pieces. And these are a couple examples of different areas of the cortex that do different things.
다다다 디나라야 가수게 젤리지거로 레빠게 젤리티 카치엠바나 니스치라 요파텐다로와 니스치라 요파텐다레스 카치엠바나 젤리 카치엠바나 레빠게 차실라야 두 스탐데요 레스티 탄다가 수게 레싱거 건라야 두 스타 요파테 퍼데가나 상구예스.
We tend to focus on seeing and hearing and touching, but notice here is the area for taste.
다단다가 수게 디로와 단다이 바라가 수미게 통야타 라야타 고야티가 탈레 지기투나 지고요와 단단데 바나 단다게 게라게 직땡도 데 카레스 스타발라가 수데 단데와요 레스 루츠 호라지고라 테스 루츠 호라데도요 레스.
Here is that part of the brain that's responsible for sensing touch, the somatosensory cortex.
다다다데가 수게 데 왕sur게 레슨지고로와 가수게 지가 라파인 바나츠라지고로와 어디디게 레파차시도요 레스.
This is a great example for Jillian to criticize because it's blue here and it's yellow here.
다다데라 다데 참바나 again 질량게 다가서 가서 그랬다 되게 쫀토에 사게 다니 야고치레샤스 간라바나 ngombore샤스 올라레 참발레 서부차데두스.
So since I don't have blue here, I'm pointing out to you that even though this is yellow, it's this blue part right here.
다 오데라 야르무나라 코 ngombuta yo mare simbana ola yo chugar munala yo pege te kasa sarpuyo te germo gala yo pege ngombu chashi dres.
Along this somatosensory cortex, this is where, say, you would feel things around your eye and your nose and your face.
다 단다 되게 될라야 가수가 원소 relationship 어라 되게 나라다 가수가 지금 가자가 쳐야지 연구를 되게 나는 거 차시 간텔라야 바로그 차시 댄서텔 미여서데 미타티 올라야 나타네 동바치 거와 어떻게 오라서 탄데비 차시 때다레스.
Notice that the part of the brain that is associated with your ability to touch is really big area of the brain.
다
Here's a
단다
laser pointer
가수가
if you want it.
가수가 럭처탄 되어지요 주시거라 럭처가 되어지요 주티가라나 레페기나네 그 차시 슈첨부 직사야 주거라 동바기디 데 레페기나네 차시 첨부 직선샤스.
We use our face a lot for touch.
하다가수가 럭처탄 레베기 리가르스탄바가수가 동바티 페추 슈첨부 당겨레스.
And it is very sensitive to exactly where we're being touched, as you learned about way back when in year 2.
하다 롱어마시스 루렌이와 갑스디 장요레스 로가수게 지가 동바기 때 차실라도 서락바임바나 가수 동바테 럭수베 쳔부 요바데 체수 장요레스.
Much more so than, say, our trunk, which is only this part.
하다가수게 zupu게 지가 띠어로다. trunk sisters lupugo lijon chigorwa dele de barbara betu suano yores kuimbana chashitanda de chonchon chimashimendo dela.
So, if the doctor touches your hip and you can't feel that, and it's due to part of the brain, what part of the brain is it?
Ketis ro amjigi choronga ta shingu segro shingu dela. Shingu dela tu de tan choronga shingu dela tu pate chogu bai bai baina choronga lepa kawala chonsho yores lepa kangitan ro yores.
Yep, the damage would be right here.
Ta ko chonsho se de yores.
So this is one way that a doctor can do a physical exam and see where might the stroke or where might the damage in the brain be just by examining the physical body.
Ta dina ro la tene de tenga so amji chike dus tashi cheba la tene de da lupu ki chashi la tene de ta pichi shaba nga so do phopai mana ro ani phosate lepa chung lepa ki chashi ko la chun chi sha sa te dila tene de ta ni ko tat ki yores.
This is if our body was in proportion to what our brain was dedicated to, what our body would look like.
Da keti ro ta da tizu chi sha do de ka ti asuge lepa ge chi kari chi ge yo me chi ro lepa ge chashi ge ta ko chornge ta tun de ta nga su zu pu chi du pai ba na dina ro chi yores.
Most of what our brain covers is our face and our hands.
Da nga su lepa ge chashi la du sta pai ba na so de nga su ge dong pa ta ne lak pa ri duas.
But notice that our tongue has a lot too.
De na nga su ge chele ge ya chashi te shu cham bo yo ba de la tu no chi dus.
Why would we need to have good sense in our tongue?
Nga su ge chele la ya chi yang ko ge ta ro sur se gro ta so de shu cham bo yo ba ge jin se gar chi ne res. Test.
Not for taste, because remember this is touch right now.
Tanda bara nga su ga ro sur tang ki je she gor wa.
This may be a hard question for a monk, because when you're eating something that might be alive, you want to know if it's still moving around, because that could really damage you. You want to have a good sense of touch in your tongue.
Ta ga su chi ba na che su ta ta chen su la ya de chi china do me ba de na yin se ba res ta ga su ke ti chorong ga ta de la rak sur ke che kor da ta no pa so do le ma rak sur wa ta touch sik do rak sur ta de la ya chi le la ya rak sur no bo bi jin se ka re se sta ba la ya ke ti chorong ge tam busun do som bu chi sa ba ina chi ba no som bu ti sa ba la te no chi chom bu che se ba wa se ti sta ba la ya som bu im ba tra ge ta ko rak sur tu no bu gu yo res.
But even if you are a monk, you want to be able to tell where your food is and where things are so that you chew them properly and you don't bite your tongue.
Da tanda che su da su im bai na ya che su ge ta kala sabi kaps chili ge rosola tane kala kawa kawa tu ane ko su ge ta ko shishu stambala ya to shishu ta su chili ga tel su ma je ga je choro ate to ane chili la tang yores.
So notice that the motor cortex is the same body mapping as the somatosensory was.
Hata ga su go once relation nang la yo pi ge satati ta da de la yang gucho relation nang la yo pi ge satati ta phajo te ta chikba shichang redus.
It's at the back of the frontal lobe, this part right here, that matches up right with that somatosensory or sensory part.
Da yo ba denga su ge der do ko gucho da kan den de gucho le shite jalo te la yor wa te ta ani ta da ga su ge kasa once relation chorwa ten se ko phajo chujon den jale de yores.
And again, note the color is purple here, but you're really talking about this part right here.
The red one, right?
The red one, yeah.
Ta de la ya ko sontra te mando chidus imba na ngombo do ngocha do shi to ka phajo te la ya ne amapu yo se sontra te ta chupares.
So now that we've talked about the cerebrum, I want to talk about some of the other structures of the brain.
Asuge elation ko korting asuge deshe jaro ata tanda karchi se stambala ya agenda khachila deshe jagis.
These are all part of the limbic system.
Da de tanda de la tempa de asuge thakor malak chashires.
The hippocampus that everybody knows about.
Da de sama ha ko ya chuta mati dore yores.
The amygdala
de kalana khamsgila shures.
Are going to be important parts, and we know that because of HM.
Da de karchine ke chambo imba de asuge ha ko yores jinse kazila tanda HM se ne bachindo akula tene ne ha ko yores.
HM had that hippocampus almost completely removed and just a little bit of the amygdala. So still experience fear, emotion, and learning.
Da ko imbana de la ane chutama da kanza la yores imbana de ge khamsile shu ge chashi this ji la bare thola chembare de chechang ko ge da ji nga ta ta samyang ta ji shi jong la su patan do tent ku yores.
But lost that ability to make new memories.
Imbana yang asu ge temba serwa su go ta temba serwa zu ge new ba de la chares.
The amygdala that's responsible for fear and emotions is connected all over the brain.
Da ga su ge di ora khamsile shu ora ga su samyang ta dawa chi go de ga la stambala ya ane alepa ge chashi chama tan do strategy yores.
This is why your emotion can have so much impact on what you do and how you perceive things.
Da tin stambala ya ane ga su ge samyang sa chi go wa samyang sa de samyang de charang ga kari chi ma chi ta charang ga jenda chi ka su kari chi thur ma su chi go wa ti chama ta ane dawa shu chambo yo patin de la tenderes.
This is another case of a patient you probably haven't heard about, patient SM, a 44-year-old woman.
Da de yang ko ne pa jenda chi che ro ne pa de chi chi na charang ge kunyo chmares me la ya SM che ane lu shi chi ga pa me chi res.
Urbach-Wife disease resulted in both of her amygdala being lost.
Da de la ya na sa chi do de la tene de ko ge khamsgla shu in sha thola do yores.
She had profound impairments in her ability to process fear.
Da ko ge tan jikta chi go wa shena chi go wa shena de ta ko ge ise chi ala ya ane cho ha chi ge chambu yores.
Before she lost her amygdala, she was scared of snakes.
After
she lost her amygdala, scientists asked her to come into the room. There was a snake in the room. She's like, oh, look at the snake. She was petting its head. She was touching its tongue.
Company on reaching to the Stambalaya, more driller on the driller chambuchi, drugala lapa chantus chioris.
She had no fear of the snake.
That driller shaggy omaris.
And they brought a tarantula into the room, a spider.
That dear dom or dom spider.
And she was like, oh, a spider.
Or did dom chiredus.
No fear.
aha tela shegi yo mares
They brought her to a haunted house. No fear.
aha ta 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 nga su haunted house Istanbul ya ta khamba so don ri sa khamba tina thi bares te thi ba na moleshena ngata de me bares
The basal ganglia, located here, are in control of our voluntary motor movements, how we learn procedurally to do this, then this, then this.
aha ta ta de nga su ge de le shep ga sandu chi gorwa ko nga su ga rangu nguche che ane nga su ge chi lika chi kana sna duk bu gore se parum chi lika dube ga de thwe janga chi gorwa oti tan da yores
Our routine behaviors and our habits and emotions. So when you get up in the morning and you go to do something and you don't have to think about it, you can thank part of your basal ganglia.
aha ta namjing nga su namjing ga cholam ta tane kom shira shi tu su yores ke te chara ane ka so gore ta namjing su su ge jindeng ga cholam ti su ta ta no me pan do imba na me pa ti sro ba imba na nga su ga ta le she ga sabdi la ya chon sho ba ti su su ngit kres
Your thalamus, located here, is the sensory information hub. It is the place where information is going and then being sent out.
aha ta thalamas se te nga su lebu ti ro lebu ti ka la na ane chatun jorsa ge ti wa ti res chatun sama te la lebu la jo ne lebu ne bar sala tang yo res
Your hypothalamus controls lots of hormones and things that are happening in your body, like hunger or thirst.
aha ta ta nga su ga lebu o ma ti kar chi go res Istanbul nga su zupu nang na chung wi ge ne ta mampu chi la tang zen chi go res ta ti tang de wi ge ane menzi te ra ke chi go res picha sha pa na nga su chi ga to ko to wa tang kha kom bala su pa ge te to la ya tang zen chi go res
And your midbrain is involved in motor control, your sleep-wake patterns, your alertness, and temperature regulation.
aha ta ta perla tu imbai na ro nga su ge nguchu la ya tang zen che che ane nga su ni khu pa tang se pa ya na nga su ge chi se long yo ra chi tong pu ne ma ni chi yo ro te tang ane zu pu ge tu se chi yo ro te la tang zen chi yo res
Your cerebellum, that part I pointed out before that was very wrinkled, helps with coordination and precision and timing of your motor control.
aha ta ta nga su ge le nin chi yo ro le nin ti ge ane tang guchu ti te ta ta chi chi ko res tang guchu ti ge te la ya nga su ke chi go tan chi gu yo ro te ne ko tak chi gu yo ro ya so tak la jo chi go ro te ta ne nga su ge le nin ge sun chi yo res
It has to do lots of calculations to be able to really get good fine motor control, and that's one of the reasons it's very wrinkled.
aha ta ta nga su ge chi guchu la ya tang zen ti ta ta chi ya chi la ya ko la tam chele mangpu chi de gu yo ro le ka mangpu chi de gu yo so ta nga su ge le pa cha shi la ta sta ba la ko gang la ya nyer ma mangpu yo ba ti le te ne res
Your hindbrain has a number of regions. One of these is the pons, and this has sensory roles in hearing and equilibrium and taste, facial sensations like touch and pain, and your eye movements to be able to track things in the room as they move around.
aha ta nga su ge jelab chi yo ro jelab la ya cha shi mangpu chi yo pa che ti na ne ta nga su phon se samshin se chi yo ro ti ba na ane nga su ge kar su ge ta ko ya ta azuk pu te lu ge tu nyam jise te tu nyam ne ya ane kar su ge ru ti chhoya che ane dongpa ge kar su ge dongpa ge la ya ra pa ta na chai ge chi chhoya chi go ta ta de yo res
And Jillian wants to add into this sleep.
aha de ta no ni ta ya de yo res
Your medulla oblongata, which is further down, is responsible for you being able to breathe in and out. Your heart rate, so it speeds your heart up or slows it down.
aha da nga su jongshin te imba na ro ta da ge ta jelo ge ta do ma ro ba imba na te kar la na nga unjing ta anyang ge phat ta do yo res
Your blood pressure and your reflexes.
aha te me se thse ta ane dong ko chi ro ta ta do yo res
The reticular formation in the hindbrain is responsible for regulating sleep and wakefulness and levels of arousal.
다 가수게 젤랍 그나나 요피가 자티가 폰소사시 또 자티 폰소테 바나 아니 아니 땅 아니 가서 그래 세바더니 셀롱거름 바텔라 땅진 시와던 요레스.
Even though our brain is only 2.5% of our body weight, we've got trillions of neurons and quadrillions of connections. Actually, 100 trillions of neurons and 100 quadrillions of connections.
다 지금 바나가서 레파 두푸기 지selata 바나 자차니 상가마 또 말해 심바나 띵나라야 가서 원사데 디르도와 텀범 잘하스제 아니 거기 데트데 아니 탁탁 첨부 잘하스데 요레스.
Sorry, I said that wrong. 100 billion and 100 trillion connections. But it receives 15% of the blood supply, 20% of our oxygen, and 25% of our glucose.
다 디나도 임바이나 거기 가서 즈불라 테비기 탁게 지요 탁여러 탁게 자체 중앙 배쳤다 아니 소롱거 자체 뉴스 배쳤다 아니 즈분한기 뉴바 글루코스 자체 뉴스 생각 배쳤던 거 레스 레바게.
Anything that takes up that much resources is doing a lot of things and is very complex.
다 디나도 거기 다 가서 통콘데 디나도 시참부 배쳤던 거 요바이바나 대기로와 왕보대기 아니 거기 젤리 하지게 전부 찍고요. 레스.
T-break.
Chat. Yeah, search person is.
Thank you.